Welcome, thinkers, to Season 4, Episode 23 of Thinking Critically. And apologies for the first time ever in the 4 seasons, full history of the show, I missed last episode. I didn't have anything in the can, and life just ran away from me, and we totally missed a week of episodes. So apologies. To be brutally honest with you, this episode has been a bit of a bit of a squeeze to get out. So I hope you appreciate it and enjoy it, and the topic couldn't have been more appropriate. As usual, this is also a video podcast, so if you're listening on Spotify, you can bring up the screen and take a look and see my beautiful face, or on YouTube, obviously. And also, I'm trying something a bit new with this episode, is a poll. So for those listeners on Spotify, there's a poll somewhere. Again, to be frank, I haven't used a poll myself with a podcast episode, so we're going completely off the tracks with this one. But basically, I'm very undecided about the mustache. Very off topic, I know. Apologies, such is life. I don't know, I'm torn. One day I'll wake up and go, oh God, I hate it, get rid of it. The next day I'll wake up and go, that's smart. And I'm really torn. So it's a poll on Spotify, click, vote, however it works. I don't know. Or feel free to comment on YouTube videos or comment on the website or whatever it may be. Let me know. Otherwise, let's go on with the show. And today I'm joined by Harry Cowdrey, who is a 10-year veteran of D&D, longer than me. So I'm very much looking forward to learning some tidbits here. Also, long-time listener of the show, definitely on the podium of top 3 fans, and has also recently taken me under his wing for Warhammer 40k, my extra new hobby on top. So yes, welcome to the show, Harry. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
That's okay, and I'm very welcome to be here. I'm, like I said, long-term listener. I'm absolutely been listening for quite some time, so I'm finally glad to be on the show. But to cut a long story short, like you said, I've been playing D&D since I was 18. I'm 29 now, but so it's been a long time. I've DM'd most of my D&D career. Outside of D&D, I'm a student nurse, so and that's played a lot into what's, I suppose, today's topic, really. So, yeah.
Thank you for that segue.
Yeah, I thought I'd flip it back to you.
Yeah, that's expertly flipped. So, talking of that, today's topic is burnout. So, what does that mean to you in the D&D and wider ttrpg framework?
So, to me, burnout is one big thing. Burnout as a whole is, for me especially, is lack of drive and lack of, you can't get that creativity or that energy you once had or the motivation you once had. So for me especially, I've suffered from burnout, and I am still suffering from especially D&D burnout. And as much as I try to get back into DMing, I sit down that one session and we'll be 5 minutes in and I can feel that feeling of, I don't want to be doing this, or I have not prepared enough, or am I doing something wrong? Are my players going to enjoy what I've prepared? So to me, in the TTG, RPG and D&D community, that is burnout, or what DM burnout, as it's probably more commonly known as.
Mm-hmm. So in my head, I've obviously, and I, again, full disclosure, like I'm giving some big reveal, like, oh, I too have suffered from it, but I think pretty much everybody does.
Yeah.
In fact, every DM I know in all the games I've played with have all been like, I'm going to take a break for a month and we're just not going to play. I'm not going to talk about it, and that's fine. So it's not some big super secret club that I'm a part.
Yeah.
I'm making myself sound like I'm a part of. But what I was getting at is that often it is that, like, let me take a step away from the table. But I like how your approach is, or your kind of vector on this discussion so far is that anxiety at the table, almost, which I guess I would say is like the initial stages, maybe your early warning signs, would you say, of when you have those feelings of like, oh God, this this session's going to be terrible because my mind's just not in it, is probably your first red flag to say, whoops, maybe you want to not run next week's session.
Definitely. So one thing I've suffered with DM burnout for a very long time, and I'm what everybody calls a forever DM. So as much, don't get me wrong, I love Dungeons and Dragons and I love tabletop RPGs, absolutely love them. And what my frustration is that I still love playing D&D. Like, there is not a moment where I don't enjoy having my friends around the table, rolling some dice, creating stories. My issue is when I'm the one having to manage all of that and plan all of that. Now, like I said, I love Dungeons and Dragons. The issue is, and especially when it comes to burnout, is when you've planned everything and you've got that anxiety, like you said, you've got all your encounters planned. You've got, okay, they're fighting a bunch of red wizards. They're going to go in and charge in and do something like that. And when you've planned something and the players seem to be engaged or they're not engaging, it's like, have I done something wrong? Am I trying to get you back on track? Am I holding on to you too much? Should I give you more freedom? And it's trying to encourage them, or as a DM, it's trying to encourage a player to engage in your story so you're in having fun as well as them. And it's when you get to a point of, especially 10 years now, I know there's DMs that go on for way longer than I have. You've used up all your ideas, and you're trying to create something when you've got no juice left. So one thing I struggle with is when I'm writing a story, or when I'm doing one of the standard Wizards of the Coast storybooks, when I've got my story or the pre-planned story in front of me, how do I act out that character, or how do I put my own twist on things so the story isn't so linear, or the story isn't so black and white? What about yourself? Have you ever because from your podcast you've had some amazing guests and some amazing stories, so what about yourself?
We would have touched on it in the show in the past. I think we've had episodes and all sorts of stuff. For me personally, and here's a question that I'm going to come back around to you on, is as my campaign is all fully homebrew, the weirdest thing that I found, and the reason why I'm talking about this is there's a direct correlation between what I'm about to describe and the burnout that I've experienced, is that it's proper rubber bandy, it's proper springy. So there'll be periods of like, shit, I need to do like a lot. I need to design 4 floor dungeons, like 7 encounters, make it all congruent, make it all make sense in the universe. We need this, and then that could happen, and then this, that, and the other. And then obviously, as the trope would be correct, in that they never hit that, or it takes them 10 more sessions to hit it before I do. And then I've got nothing to do. And I've done basically no prep for the last maybe 3 months, because I'd kind of had this one in the books for ages, and I had nothing to do because they're going through it at a pretty typical pace for them, which is to say slow.
Yeah.
Those who listen to the stream will know that the last 2 sessions I figured that would be the end of that chapter, and it has not been the case. So the title is like updating. I'm like really struggling to find a title for the session, because I'm like, you really should be there by now. I can't think of any more synonyms for like where you're at in the story. So in those periods, it's a piece of cake, because I'm like, it's about as close as you can get to emulating being a player, because there's very little upfront stuff you have to do, and I can just like eat dinner, run upstairs, and be like, okay, cool, I'm the third one here, and yeah, we ready to go? Okay, let's go. And that's it, and open up my OneNote, and bish bash bosh, it's there. Contrast with like ending an arc and going into a new chapter, or starting from scratch, is like, oh god, it's that blank page writing, where they always say, for writers, the advice for writers is always like, get some words down, because it's much easier to continue when you have hello, my name is Bob on the page than it is a completely blank page. But obviously you'll start like that with like, what's the enemy? Don't know, dragon? And like so I find that my burnout, obviously, as I said, correlates with those periods of hyperactivity versus inactivity. So at the moment, I'm very fortunate. As I said, I can genuinely look forward to to sessions without having that pit of anxiety of, oh God, have I done too much or too little? There's always a flicker. There's always, am I in the right headspace? Am I, not tired enough? Am I gonna, be able to improvise what they come up with? And luckily with the decent group of players that I have, and we're all on the same page. It all kind of makes my life easier. Now, in the past, I think what exacerbates DM burnout is when your players maybe not as, what's the politically correct term? Engaged?
Enthused
Yes,
is probably something enthused. And
it's something we've talked about several times on the show before, and I still like to talk about it and bring it up because it is unique to, obviously it's not completely unique to D&D, but I can't think of any other hobby that I've done in the past, any other social activity where people can have such vast different reasons for sitting at the table or for doing an activity.
Yeah.
So like if you're sitting with your mates and you're playing Overwatch, for example, you all kind of want to win the fight. Yes, some of you are having a few beers at the same time and like chatting away, and others are like making shots and calling shots and defend B and that. But broadly, you want to win the match.
Yeah.
You're there. You're playing the same game. It's all very constrained. Likewise with 40k or Warhammer or something.
Mm-hmm.
You and your opponent, you're there to play a very regimented game. Like you'd absolutely want to win. Yes, you might be there because it's something to do on a Wednesday night, but you're still like going through the very similar motions. No one's there just for fun. Like I don't know. I mean, but
we're all there for fun.
Whereas, indeed. But a couple of my players, like one guy who I've mentioned several times before, for him, or at least in the past, maybe less so now, for him it was very much was like a social thing, and you could swap out D&D for literally any other social event and he would have been happy days. Like, in fact, he's asked us when we've missed sessions to be like, oh, do you want to go longboarding instead? That's how vast a gulf it was between him and like D&D was incidental. Sitting down and rolling dice and playing his character was incidental to, I want to chat to my friends for a bit. And I had other players who were like, no, I've been waiting 2 weeks for this session because I really want to find out what happened and I want to use this new spell and I've leveled up and I've got this feat to use and this, that, and the other. And that's why I love this discussion and talking about that kind of stuff, because that is, it boggles my mind how those two people can still somehow come together and have the same
I have actually been in your exact same spot so many times. So exactly, I think at one point I had a table. So I was doing Horde of the Dragon Queen, and to this day, I still will say it was my favourite campaign to run. It was a Wizards of the Coast standard adventure. I think it was one of their first ones they ever did for 5th edition. And I know it gets a lot of bad rep for being, it was poorly written, they could have done this, blah, blah, blah. The first book, they're going to make mistakes. But for the here and now, I will say it was my favourite campaign to run. I had so many, my players, like you said, at that point when I was running it, we all came around that table to do one thing, play D&D. And it was that was probably like maybe 5-6 years ago now. And I was probably in the prime of my DM career. And I absolutely loved DMing. I would say I love DMing more then than I would say I enjoy it now, or I just do it because no one else wants to. So, like I was saying, at one point I had about 8 or 9 people around my table to play D&D and to play the adventure, and I was writing these big long I would come home from work and I would spend my evenings writing the next chapter of the book out, or writing the next set of encounters, or I would be discussing with my players throughout the day, right, your character's leveling up, what spells can they use? And they were like, can I do X, Y, and Z? At level 3, no, you cannot have 5 attacks. But, wait until you're like level 15, then maybe we can have this chat again. And, it was such a good, in my experience anyway, it was such a good time to run the campaign. And my players, all came around for that reason, to play D&D. Now, as I think, 5 or 6 years ago, we were a lot younger then. We had a lot more free time.
Yeah.
And I think as we've aged, and some players have drifted off, I've got a few new ones in their replacement. life and the relationship between my players, they were my friend. They still are my friends,
Yes.
Yeah,
First and foremost.
First of all, they are my friends, not my players. But, some of the relationships between my friends strained, and it caused that tension at the table, which I think affected how, especially me, it's affected how I've DM'd, because it's like, right, I can't have you at the table anymore, or I can't have both two players at the table anymore, because I felt like their relationship as individuals would affect the way the game was played. And my table has never really been ultra roleplay heavy. I've tried to encourage it. I as a DM are quite roleplay heavy because I like the idea. Every NPC is different.
Yes.
Every character is different. So why would you not have a funny accent on one NPC and a not so funny accent on another NPC?
Mm-hmm.
And going back to the relationship of my players and why I'm in the situation I'm in now, and many other people find themselves in now, is as a DM, I think the relationship you have with your table is very much like a human body. As the DM, you are the brain of the table. You're the eyes and ears. You are the five senses of the human body. You're every trap the players spring. You're every sound, every smell, every sight they see. The players are the rest of the organs. They make the game happen. Mm-hmm. But you, as the DM, you help guide them through life. You help make sure that everything works. Bringing my nursing background into this now.
I was going to say, you're showing off now.
Yeah, showing off now. So, anyway, back to Burnout. So, like I was saying, and as DM, you're making sure your players are having fun. My table has always been fair. I've always enjoyed a serious campaign. So, my tables have always had sort of either a heavy political theme or a heavy dark sinister theme, but that's because that's what I enjoy DMing, and my players seem to enjoy that as well, otherwise they wouldn't keep going back each week.
Yes.
So I enjoy a good serious campaign, and it's not for everybody, and I understand that it's not for everybody, and writing those big dark sinister scenes where you've got the arch enemy and you finally get to their lair and you're having this big standoff and your players overcome them, or in my case, when I was asked, do you mind switching DMs? And I jumped at that opportunity. I shot myself in the foot by having the big bad kill everybody off in like the first few turns. And I was like, one of the things I think leads to my burnout is probably that scene, because I often replay that scene in my head, and it is kind of like a guilt thing for me, because when you're DMing for so long and you've done all this work, you've done all this effort, and it's nice for the players to overcome that. But selfishly, and I'll admit it, I was probably a selfish DM at that time, or at that moment at least. I had the big bad win because I was like, actually, the players could overcome this, and all the work they were leading to had kind of put it in a 50-50 scenario that the players could win or the big bad could win. But as a DM, like I said, you're the brains of the operation. And after DMing for this point 5 or 6 years, I was already suffering.
Jeez.
Yeah, I was already suffering from, I'd say, the early signs of burnout. Like, I couldn't create anymore. I felt like the creative flow had left. And I wanted to play D&D. I just didn't want to run D&D. And it was like, okay, I want to be the person that springs the trap. I want to be the person that causes the shenanigans. Yes. I want to have the argument with a barkeep because he won't offer me a 5 copper discount on a drink that cost me 6 copper.
Yeah. That's trivial
matter. A bit of trivia, but I wanted to be that player. I didn't want to be that DM. And we had a lovely DM who came after me, and I was so engrossed in his campaign as a character. But the other players were so used to how I DM'd and the style of my DMing that they couldn't get on with him.
All right.
It was a real shame, because I'll still say this to his face now, that you, as a player, you were one of my favourite DMs. And it was a real shame that the rest of them couldn't. They were so heavily, in my opinion, they were disinterested because they were so used to how I ran things, and they were so used to the rulings that I would say. I'm a big fan of the rule of cool. If something's cool, all the rules go out the window. So if you wanted to cast 2 spells, which I know in especially if we're talking about Dungeons 5th edition,
action economy,
action economy,
you're triggering me.
Yeah, if you wanted to cast 2 spells, but you done it in a way that was cinematically really cool, then I'd be like, do you know what? Fine, do it. But
that's 50% of the listeners frothing at their mouth now.
Going 50% of your listeners going, right, I've had enough.
He doesn't know what he's talking about.
But I'm a big fan, like I said, big fan of rule of cool trumps all, where the DM after me was very much, as I like to say, a stickler for the rules, and that's fine. That was completely fine. But I enjoyed that because it limited. I say limited. It didn't limit the flow of things. It made sure mechanically and cinematically the game worked. But so many people were used to my rule breaking at the table. They were like, "No, I've had enough. It's not fun anymore." And oh
blimey,
yeah. And I was like, "That's not right." But I did eventually take over as DM again. But we ran a different campaign, and I think from that point, I think Burnout that's it, and it's like that today. I struggle to come up with scenarios that are interesting. I think there is the odd session where it's like, oh my god, Harry's got his flow back. It's going to be a really good session next week, and it's like, no, we're back to this dreary old. We're going through the Icewind Dale. We're doing this. We're picking up this. Yeah, and it's like I just can't. I don't know how to finish that sentence. It's like I'm trying my best to make this fun, but I'm not having fun. And if I'm not having fun as DM, and it shows, and it affects. It's like an infection. If it's showing on your face, it's going to show on other people's face.
Yeah.
One thing I always found is if a player is disinterested, they'll pick up their phone and they'll scroll through Facebook or they'll scroll through something, and it's like, if I can see that, other people can see that, and they are going to assume that's okay to do. And one thing at my table now, I often see players do that. And it used to really faze me, but it doesn't anymore. And it's like, we're just 5 or 6 people around the table now, and it's like, let's just...
Yeah, no one's doing it to be, probably to be malicious. It's just totally habit understand. For a lot of people.
It's just habit of like, I've got my D&D Beyond my thing up, let's just do this, and let's do this. And that's probably another symptom of my burnout, is when I can see players disinterested, I then become disinterested as well.
Yeah, which brings us back. Well done again to that the lack of the enthusiasm on some players. Which originally, when I was describing that player earlier on, who was like, "Oh, were we playing tonight? I'm halfway up a mountain," and we'd go, "Okay, well, I guess you're not." That, a bit like you just described, used to be like, "Okay, well, he doesn't care and he's wasting my time and this, that, and the other." But then after several prayers to myself to say that, again, like you said, they keep coming back. Like that is a not insignificant amount of time to waste, quote unquote. So he must be getting value from it.
Yeah.
So that's all. That's the bare minute. Like you're done. You're done. Like that's happy days. They're happy to spend 4 hours with you. That's more than I can say about most other people in the world. So
unless they're being paid.
So that's indeed.
Yeah, unless they're being paid.
So, that's coincident.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of things there you mentioned that I wanted to loop back on. About how your analogy for like DM is the brain and the people the organs and stuff. And I think one major contributing factor to potentially to burnout is the responsibility. I know people say a DM is a player too. Yes, absolutely true. I agree.
100%
but there
agree.
is significant, substantial differences. Like they're not the same. They're interacting with a framework, but in vastly different ways. And one has more responsibility than the others. I know that there's a lot of people out there that will say, nope, players' responsibility to not be dickheads and to make sure everyone's having a good time. Yes, both of those things are true. But you remove the DM and the wheels fall off of that session.
Yes.
That's why you can get away with Jaegering one of the players for one session if they can't make it. You rarely can get away with the without the DM, and I think that's that's that inherent difference, and that responsibility weighs.
One thing I go to is you always see memes on the internet of, oh, buy your DM a drink next time you see them, or buy your DM snacks, they'll love you forever. There's a reason those memes exist, because the DM has the additional responsibilities. So everything you've said is 100% is true. Yes, the players do have a responsibility. In my opinion, players have the responsibility to know what their character does. They need to manage their own characters like XP and things like that. The DM tells you how much you have. It's your responsibility to make sure it's correct. And ultimately, not be a dick at the table. If you're going to be a dick at the table, the DM, then the responsibility falls back to the DM to tell you to shut up. To tell you, right.
Yes, and you're right. Yeah.
It falls back on the DM to say, no, heads back in the game, or you're free to leave.
Yeah.
And everybody expects the DM to have everything planned and ready for that session. I mean, yes, that's the job of the DM, to have your session planned out. That's the additional responsibility a player does not have. A player turns up to be a part of the adventure. And that is great, and that's what we want. We want players to be engaged in the adventure. But if you have a DM who isn't enthused to be a DM, or is stuck in a position where no one else wants to be DM, and it falls on them to then create everything when they have nothing to create, or they've got nothing left to create, or feel like they can't contribute in a creative way that you as a player can enjoy, then we have burnout. We have burnt out, and we have nothing. Like I use the term "we have nothing to give" incredibly lightly, because obviously we have something to give, but the responsibility of a DM is so much more than a player. And as a forever DM, I can say that. And
I don't want to get like the tiny violins out for us.
Yeah, I know. I'm kind of feeling I'm going to have to get a tiny violin and go, oh, boo-hoo. But, I say all of this, like slapstick comedy, like I said at the beginning, I love D&D, and I love tabletop RPGs, and there's nothing that will take my enjoyment away from it. I just find that there needs to be players need to run their own campaigns. I think if you've been a player for so long, and I think it's a lot of apprehension on the player's side as well. I think it's a lot of, the DM has to do X, Y, and Z. Yes, but I think every player should be a DM, and every DM should be a player.
Yeah.
There should never be a forever DM or a forever player. If you find yourself in that situation, which is I say it's very sad, I'm in that situation. And it's a situation where I think a player, and I think some players get the apprehension of, I don't know if I'll be that good, or I don't know. DMing's all about how you feel. It's all about your own style. No one wants to copy anybody else. Okay, you can look up examples. There are great DMs out there that you can pick up examples and tips for. When I first DM'd, I suffered massively from the Mercer effect. And I was like, I'm never going to be him. I'm not him. So why try to DM like him? Let me do my own thing. Yeah. And I quickly gathered, and I quickly picked up my own way of doing things. And I was like, do you know what? I actually prefer the way I've done it to try and copy someone else. Who, for someone who's an actor and someone who isn't an actor, there's a massive, massive difference, or a massive gap I'm trying and create. And I think most DMs, especially in the last 10 years, any new DMs that have tried to be, or tried not to copy Matthew Mercer or any other famous DM, would probably be being a little bit lying to themselves. I think we've all tried it, or at least tried to dabble in it.
I was going to say you need to be have my level of arrogance, because then you completely sidestep it because you just think you're the best anyway. So it's fine.
And that's okay. If you can do that, then that's okay. But I think a lot of us, I think a lot of us fall into that category, especially in the last 10 years. And I think there's a lot of outside influence. That's what you need as a DM. You need a lot of outside influence to fuel your creativity, to fuel your games. But turning it back to burnout is when you've lost that interest in, I say lost interest, you've got that disassociation with wanting to be a DM or wanting to write the stories or wanting to be the one that's, oh, right, okay, my encounter, you're in a forest, there's goblins, or,
fight the goblins.
Fight the goblins.
Yeah, it's kind of it's like a spiral.
It is a spiral.
I want to avoid too many allegories to like mental health issues, but they are
I was
somewhat
literally
related.
just about to say burnout and burnout from mental health issues are two different things, and that's one thing absolutely. To have someone who's suffering from mental health burnout is completely different from DM burnout, and I think it's very good that you actually brought that up.
Yeah, but the spiral is similar in that, like, if you lose that, like, I felt it before. I've been like, oh god, I gotta go upstairs and perform for 4 hours, and then it makes you, well, certainly in my case, you feel that regret, and not self-loathing is too strong a word, but like, oh god, I should, like, why am I not enjoying this?
Yeah.
Like, this is a fun thing, and why am I now not enjoying it? And not being able to answer that question is the problem.
I think that's where the two cross. I think, especially when you get the anxiety of, oh, I'm at the table with 5 to 6 other people, or even more or less. I don't want to do this. That is where there's a lot of crossover.
Yeah.
But you're still with DM burnout, especially when you're finding that lack of interest or lack of desire to do something that you used to find really fun. And there's so much additional outside factors that carry into DM burnout or burnout in general. And, our personal lives do come into that a lot. So if you've had a bad day at work, or you've had a bad day just in general, or you're going through a tough time, that's where the similarities and the lines cross. Because if you're getting disinterested in stuff like everyday life that you normally find enjoyable, then you're gonna find you're not going to want to DM because you found that used to be something you enjoyed. You're not gonna get the same feeling that you once had. And I say, like, my thing mainly from burnout is I can't find my lack of creativity anymore. I find like I've done it too long. Like I don't have anything more I can give as a DM. Like I want to say that, like, I want to make my players happy and I want to see them smile. Like I can and I can flick back through memories in my head of when I've had players at the edge of the table, hands like scraping in the table, go, "What's next? What's next?" And I've closed the book and said, "It's right. It's almost 11 o'clock. Session's over. You'll find out next week." And I want to relive that, but I find as we've gotten older, and as my table, as my players and friend group ultimately has shrunk, between the relationship between my friends and different players and life outside, DM burnout affects all of that. And especially when you're playing with such a closely knit group of friends that all enjoy D&D, and when you have players that don't get on, it affects you as the DM, because you're saying, right, I can't have these two players in the same room because everybody feels that tension, like I was going back to earlier. And as DM, you're like, if these two individuals in real life are not going to talk to each other, now I'm going to force them to have their characters do it.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's effectively what I'm doing, because you can't because when does the disassociation between it as a game and real life stop? And it's like
another responsibility as DM
to
walk that line.
Is to walk the line of where does reality, I say reality, it is effective, where does reality stop and where does the game begin or end? And if I've got two people at the table that don't like each other for XYZ reason, but their characters are best friends or their characters get along, I can't have them sat talking to one each other like they're best friends, because they actively despise each other in real life.
one funny anecdote on that I want to bring in about that blurring of lines between the reality and the fantasy is we just recorded Dungeons Dice and Dudes episode on the Sunday just
Very
before
nice.
we're talking now, and one of the players' backstories is a page and a half, and he has just gone all in, like it's convoluted,
Mhm.
right? It is. I'm not gonna.
No spoilers, please, because I want to watch that when it comes out. I'm going to listen to that.
There's no airs or graces. It is convoluted. I think he lost himself halfway through writing it, to be honest, and I think he'll admit that as well. The rest of ours are interesting but concise. I think it's fair to say. And in game, there are events tying into his backstory, and our characters in game are like, okay, so who are these people again, and why are they hunting you, and what's happening here, and so what do you want to get out of this? And they're trying to understand it. And he's, oh, I haven't told you everything, and maybe there's more to learn, and this, that, and the other. We went to a break, 15-minute break in the stream and in the episode, and I was like, right, so what is like? I don't understand. Like, can't play the game anymore because I am totally fucking lost, dude. You got to help me out here. Who are the bad? Are they bad guys or are they good guys? Because I don't know. And that, like, both, art imitates life. My character was completely confused because I was completely confused, but it made sense, and that was nice. The parallel lines met and converged for a beautiful moment of like, what is happening? Because I don't know.
That's also such a good role play there. Like, as a fan of the show, and that's such a good. Like, I'm confused in real life. I'm also confused in game.
Yeah, I was like, you got to help me out. Let me at least give me some bits, and when we go back, I can assume we've talked about this in character at some point. But then I know I can make decisions a bit better than just. I don't know anymore. It got to the point where we were just like, you make all the decisions because none of us really know which way to go.
Just tell us who we're fighting. That's it. Just tell us who we're fighting.
Yes, and we went round the houses of where we were going to go and what the next steps were, bish bash bosh, but it got resolved in the end. But one of the things that I thought of a little while ago when we were talking about, there's this irony there in that player and DM divide of there are players that exist out there that do, for lack of a better term, take the DM position for granted. I've certainly played with them in the past. Thankfully, none in my current games, full disclaimer. But they definitely exist out there. And the irony is that if, like you said, if they were to be asked to step up and DM, they wouldn't want to because they'd be scared about what it entails.
Yeah.
There's like a level of cognitive dissonance there to be like, so you do know what's going on here, and that's why you don't want to do it.
I've always said, and I have said this to all of my players, DMing isn't hard. But I've been doing it for 10 years. They've never done it. And it's like, DMing isn't hard as long as you believe in the story that you have created or that you're following. I say you plan, but you don't. I often find plans go out the window. And so I structure a campaign in which that I have all my encounters planned. I have an overall arc of where the players start, where they need to end up, and what happens in between is up to them. Which is, I think, all D&D adventures as a whole, ultimately. And I think players that are forever players are just a little bit anxious in themselves that they don't want to have. They don't want that. They want to experience everything and they want to do everything as a player, which is great. The feeling as a DM is so, in my opinion, so much more because you're watching everything happen. It's like you're watching a TV series or you're watching a film because you're watching these characters engage or you're watching these characters fight a dragon. And if you've got an imagination like mine, you can actually see it happening as their characters, how they've described themselves and what they're going on. If you've got like if you've got 3D printed miniatures or you've got the 3D scenery, that's just a little bit of fun for the players, in my opinion, because I love all the scenery and things you get for D&D and other sort of RPGs, which helps with the players that they're imagining it. So if you're like a halfling barbarian absolutely ripped to shreds, and you've got a big a halfling-sized great axe, and if it helps with you getting that mini on, and it helps you imagine what's going on, that's brilliant. But it all goes back to the fact that your responsibility as a player is so much less, and and take, like you said, players take that for granted. I think a lot of players, if they think about it, they actually sit down and have a conversation with themselves and go, do you know what, I don't actually realise what goes into D&D or what goes into this session or what the DM has planned for this session. I think players would be a little bit shocked into what some DMs actually do. You know, it could be the small things of, so I love tea staining. So what I used to do is I'd tea stain documents and hand them into that. And that's a small thing. But, you know, once you've written out or you've typed out this huge letter in character or NPC character and you've handed it to the player, or you've bought all the additional supplies to like wax seals and everything to make the players feel more engaged, or to make sure your players feel like this world is real or this world has something to offer. And I think some players especially, don't see that, or they don't realise that DMs put a lot of effort into their games. And
certainly,
and I have been that person to tea stain. I've been the person to wax seal. I've been the person. I've been the person to, not so much these days, but especially back in the sort of highlight of my DM career, I've been the person to buy all the minis, to buy all the scenery, to buy everything, and tiny violins again. You know, and that was all for me. Like, I wasn't doing it for my players. I was doing that for me because I enjoyed it, and my players, as much as they enjoyed it as well, they didn't take on the fact that all of this is my time and effort that I'm putting in to make sure you guys have fun. And I wasn't realizing, as I was halfway through doing stuff, I wasn't enjoying it. I was like, why am I doing this? You know, it's a piece of paper. They're just going to bin it, or it's going to end up in the back of the D&D box.
Yeah, what does this mean? Nothing, not important.
It was like, I've put time and effort into that, and they didn't seem to value it. Now, I might have taken that completely out of context. They might have loved it and gone, oh, this has been the highlight of my thing. So I think another thing in Burnout, and what DMs need to realise as well, is that never take your players for granted as well, DMs. You know, okay, you may be suffering from burnout, like, say, the pair of us are, but your players do value you, and they do value a lot of the stuff you do. And it's just, like I said, about players having a sit-down conversation with themselves. DMs, you need to have a sit-down conversation with yourselves and realise that this adventure you've made is brilliant. Your players bring this adventure to life.
Indeed,
your players are engaging, are reacting and engaging with your world. This is something that you've made, so your players can enjoy and love and do whatever they want in it.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I love the hobby as a whole, and why I extol its virtues, especially in a younger setting. I've had episodes on education and all that kind of stuff where it does help, because it teaches everybody, even me in my adult life. You still learn that, like, everybody is. It sounds so reductive. Everybody is different, of course.
Everybody is different.
But the way they show that appreciation to some, you know, to one person, them going, "Oh, cool," is like, wow, their top level of appreciation. They never say that to anything, but to you, it's like, oh wow, they were so dismissive.
Yeah.
But that's you know, that's why it's so important. You know, even as an adult person, I still learn that, as I said, that guy that was up a mountain one time, he's, you know, his appreciation is showing up, and he now wants to build his own subclass, and has asked me for help in designing a subclass based around his character and what he wants to do. And I'm like, okay, I'll try. And that's, you know, they show their appreciation in different ways because everybody is different. And that's why, like, you know, my heart feels when I see school kids, you know, at their after school clubs or whatever, playing it, because I'm like, oh, they're learning like incredible skills that are just gonna just pay dividends for the rest of their life, because I'm still learning those skills now and I'm finding it useful.
One thing I'll say is, like I said at the beginning, I love Dungeons and Dragons, I love D&D, and nothing will take that away. Why we're doing Burnout, why we're doing an episode covering Burnout, is that Burnout, it affects all of us, especially DMs. It affects all of us in different ways, and it affects us in different time periods. Like you said, you were like a rubber band or a spring, I think it was. You know, you have sessions where you were fully engaged and, you know, it was amazing, and then you go periods where it was like, not so much. And like I said, it was similar in my case where I now have like a block of creativity where I don't feel like I can give anything. You know, it could be different for another DM. They could just feel like they've lost interest in, because they're either doing it so long, or some of their players are doing whatever and they're just not finding interest in the game anymore. What we've ultimately got to realize is that even though Dungeons and Dragons has so much to offer, like you said, education has got so much to offer kids, so much to offer. One thing I found, and this is some further reading for some of your listeners, is that D&D can be played in prisons to help rehabilitate prisoners. And so there was... I'll find the study for you and I'll send it to you. So some prisoners in America were playing Dungeons and Dragons. Totally off track, I know, but just for a side note, I'll be quick. But you know, they're playing Dungeons and Dragons in prison, and the prisoners playing it realized that, and they came to terms with the crimes they had committed through the role play and through what the DM was doing. The DM was just another prisoner trying to have fun, you know. And what he was doing is he was helping people realize the error of their ways, and you know, he was helping people overcome. These are people who've like committed murder and they've done all sorts of horrible crimes, but they have come to terms with the fact that, oh my god, I've done this, you know. And it can be a way to rehabilitate. If that sounds something, you know, 20, 30 years ago during the satanic panic, you know, I think people were like summoning devils. You know, 20, 30 years later, it's being used to rehabilitate prisoners. So, you know, it is a magical game, and it's can teach so much, and it can give so much, but it can only give what the DM and the players have to offer.
Yes, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts in this, for sure.
Yeah.
Before I ask you for your silver bullet, we touched on it earlier on, but I wanted to go into a bit more detail. Is I think the one reason that I keep going with my 90 plus, I think 97th session next week for my homebrew campaign of like 5-6 years, is because I have two very, very solid games that I'm a player in with very, very good groups. And I think if I didn't have that, I'm certain my campaign wouldn't have lasted.
Yeah.
And it's such a weird release. Like, until I sit down and think about it, it never really occurred to me. But it is such a weird release to be like. And I've been full disclosure with both DMs. I've said, look, this is my turn your brain off evening. Like, I'm coming just to be a player. Like, I help with rules and stuff, and I can't help it sometimes. But like, I'm fully invested. Your game is your game. Make any calling you want. I don't care. It's not like it's my night off from worrying about calling, making, you know, jurisdictions and all that kind of stuff. And that is such a great release to just be like, yeah, right. I am just one dude who is can be very two-dimensional, but they're only RPG characters, so I'm not expecting bloody Romeo and Juliet. So that's fine. He's after his thing. He acts like a knob half the time. Beautiful.
That's what we like.
We're having a laugh for the next 5 hours, and then that's it. I'm done, and I don't have to be like, oh god, what have I got myself into, and what's happening next week, and this, that, and the other. So for me, my silver bullet is pretty much a silver bullet for most people, as far as I understand, in find 2 other really good games, and then you'll be fine. I realize like how much like gold dust they are, and how rare that is, or can be for some people. I've just been very, very fortunate in having found myself surrounded by very talented and patient people.
That's
sometimes. But for yourself, then, what's your, you know, when you found yourselves in these creative ruts, when you tried to put pen to paper and nothing, your hand doesn't want to move, what have you found then to at least ease that mire?
The best thing that I found is very similar to you, in fact. So I'm a big fan of JRPGs, and I'm a big fan of, like we mentioned, you know, I've taken you under the wing of Warhammer, you know, and I have found since getting back into a different hobby, I have been able to DM more effectively. And I feel that when I do DM, which is rare now, my sessions are sort of few and far between, but when I do DM, I can get through them, and I'm like, my players can have fun, and I can see when I'm at the DM screen or I'm at the DM screen, my players do have fun. And it's like, do you know what? If I can keep doing what I'm doing, taking the breaks, it might be 6 weeks, it might be only a week, and getting people together again to have that shared experience of Dungeons and Dragons and having a good time makes me want to carry on DMing. It's hard because all I want to do is be a player, but I very much will be a DM for these players as long as they keep coming back, as long as they keep saying, Harry, please do it, come on, let's do it, and they appreciate the time that I give, which I think they all do, and they all have said they do, but they appreciate the breaks that I need to take to make sure they have fun. Because at the end of the day, we're all coming around the table to from 3 to 5 hours in a shared experience, and if we're not all having fun, something's gone wrong. And as DM, going back to your responsibilities, it's to make sure that you and your players are having fun. And that's my silver bullet.
I think I find it hard to empathize sometimes with some games and some guests I've had on, admittedly, because the nature that they play is they're either pickup groups or they're remote. And I find that very hard to jive with, as all of my games are with people I know or now know very well, or didn't when we started, perhaps. Like one of the guys in the Dungeons, Dice and Dudes campaign, I'm going to his stag in 8 weeks, and I'd never met him before we started playing D&D. So
I was going to say, one of my players is my best man, or will be my best man at my wedding. And I knew him before we played D&D, but we had such a shared experience or shared interest in a lot of things that D&D just grew us close. It was one of the things that drew us closer together, but it was one of the main things that we would always say on the way home from work or the way home from doing this. We'd be like, oh yeah, what's happening this session? What's happening this week? And I've got a blabbermouth, so whenever I was planning something and I was super excited, he'd be the first person I told, and he was like, "Why did you tell me? You've ruined it."
That the curse of the DM.
The curse of the DM, and I was always excited, and because we used to live together as well, so it's like, do you know what? I cannot tell you because I'm just so excited. I have to tell someone, but having a close-knit friend group that also share your experience or share your interests, that happily sit around the table with you to play one game is a magical experience. And I think, which is why I am suffering from DM burnout, but what keeps me going and what keeps me wanting to play Dungeons and Dragons is so I can share an experience with my close friends around the table. And, we're all adults now and our schedules are all over the place. Especially mine, I never know when I'm going to be working next. I work 12-hour shifts. Some of them work 9 to 5 and have the weekends off. I don't have the weekends off. So it's about getting people together. And when we do get them together, as a DM, I want to make sure they're having fun. I want to make sure I'm having fun because I'm putting all the effort. That's a lie. I'm not putting all the effort in. I'm putting in and I'm putting in the additional effort to make sure the campaign or the session runs smoothly.
Yeah, I think with that in mind, what you've just touched upon there, finally, from my point of view, I think in addition to obviously finding some like-minded individuals that a random pickup group may or may not lead to, scheduling, I think, has. I was telling a couple of other friends in the car the other night. They were asking, how have you kept these 2 games going on for so long? And honestly, I think my life rolled a natural 20 in that my personal campaign that I run was every other Tuesday, and it's been like that for 6 years. No deviation. Played on a Saturday once because we were all free and we did it in person.
Ooh,
otherwise,
nice.
every Tuesday night.
Yeah,
it was like, oh, exotic. Yeah. Playing at the weekend. How unusual. I've got to.
That's like the time for
wire my brain.
The old 12-hour sessions. That's what we use. One thing I kind of wish we were able to do still is have 12-hour sessions. I don't think I could be able to do it just sat down for 12 hours talking, but that's one thing, especially younger. Like if you ever get
when you have all the time in the world,
in the world, when you're at college or uni or whatever, you can do all that. But scheduling is one thing.
Yeah, and that really helped. And then the 2 games that I'm a player in, as again magically, conveniently could only do like alternating Sundays. So when they were like, "Oh, we can only do Sundays," on the second game I was going to be involved in, I was like, "Oh God, it's going to be the same one as the other game that can only do Sundays." Nope. Somehow turned out to be the opposite one. I was like,
No
perfect,
way.
lock it in now, because there's no way that's ever going to happen again. So it's like every Sunday I alternate as being a player, and then every other Tuesday I'm a DM, and that's been this way now for those three for like 2 years. Somehow I'm like, I don't like to think about it, just in case it shakes the universe too much and it all crumbles down. I'm just like, just keep. Because I know how hard it is to schedule. I know how difficult people find it, and people ask me. I'm like, somehow the two games I'm a player and didn't want to clash ever.
Yeah.
And it's just beautiful how it worked out.
That's what we love. That's what we like.
One final thing I wanted to mention is, obviously we've talked a lot about DM burnout, but perhaps we've alluded to it throughout the discussion, but I wanted to get your thoughts on perhaps maybe is there an equivalent for players? And maybe that's what we've discussed in passing, in like, oh, they've not been that enthused this week. Do you like? I've never really thought about it. This is completely off the cuff, but is that a symptom of players? I'd like to think
that's a really good
that's
question.
a symptom of player burnout, and if so, like, how does that manifest itself? Maybe because the spotlight is all on DM burnout.
Yeah.
Players becoming disinterested temporarily is maybe not talked about that much or not thought about that much, but presumably it's just as likely to happen, and caused by very similar reasons, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. I could 100% agree with you there. Like, if you've got, like, I would say if you've got a campaign, not a campaign that runs too long, but if you've got a scenario which is running too long, like you've got two players having it, like I said, my sessions are never roleplay heavy, but if you've got a session or particular characters that are having a roleplay session and it's going on and on and on and on, I could see a lot of players going, and it's happening frequently, I could see players becoming disinterested, because I don't want to know if two players are going to, make out, or, or their relationship as characters is forming deeper relationships. I don't want to know that. I'm here to slay dragons and kick ass.
Yeah.
And if you as DM or you as a player aren't just sort of like hinting the DM to say, like, could you like
speed it up?
It's been an hour and we've got 2 hours left. Can you come on? Like, I want to fight something now. I could definitely see players getting disinterested.
That's to jump in. That's one of the shared responsibilities of players as well, because I often like to push that back to the players, especially if it's two player characters, obviously, or even if it isn't, it's one player character and the DM. It isn't just the DM's responsibility. I feel it's very much within the players' wheelhouse to be like, to have that awareness of like, okay, I'm taking the piss now. I've been shopping for 2 hours and like for inane, mundane items that nobody really cares about. Like, let's spin it up.
Let me go shopping to see where I can get the cheapest healing potion.
So now I just use it to troll my DMs, because I'm like, no, I want to buy a chair. Name every chair shop in the city now. I'm like, oh no, he hasn't prepared 50 different shops. So that's where that is my line in the sand. So no, I just wanted to interrupt you there and just say that is, I think it's easy to be like, the DM should always manage. But in those cases, the player should definitely have an awareness and be like, look, I know Bob over there wants to smash the skull of a dragon in because he hasn't done it in the last 4 sessions. That's kind of, you can still wrap it up within the realm of the game without it being too much of a rug pull. But yes, absolutely, there is an element there. And I've had it with like one of my players. Softly was like, let's get to some combat down the line. We haven't had, like, I get it, I like it, I like the whimsy side of it, it's fun, it's funny, we have a laugh, but I've basically not rolled a dice for like 3 sessions. I'm like, yeah, I got you, don't worry, something will happen next time. And I kind of like those earnest discussions, because that's like a valuable spoil. So I've said to him, like, something will happen next time, and that's increased his excitement rather than diminished it from me spoiling it. So that those situations can, I guess you can help as a DM to mitigate player burnout. But again, hard thing for me to empathize on, having been fortunate that my games they take breaks. There's 2 of them, so I get to play very different characters. So it's kind of stopped me from ever getting bored or feeling like I don't want to play anymore.
Thinking back, I had this player, right? who always wanted to make a new character. And
Mhm.
whenever I play an RPG, and I've got this trope that my friends always say, Harry, you'll get to level 10 in, say, Skyrim and make a new character because you're bored of it. And he picked up on that. And so every sort of level, he'd try and die so he could make a new character. Or he would go, oh, I'm sick and tired of being a wizard. I want to be a dwarf, or I want to be a rogue dwarf now. And I'm like, oh my god, now I can see why it's so frustrating for you guys when I say I've made a new character. Yeah, so I could, totally get that. I do see player burnout being a thing. I will probably do some further reading myself actually on player burnout, because if it is a thing, which I very much assume it isn't very widely covered, or it's very much dusted under the carpet. So you've given me some more homework. So thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
Mission accomplished. Well, before we wrap up completely, is there anything you wanted to talk about that we might have missed or not gotten to yet?
For the here and now, no. However, I do want to mention to people, in general, if you've got DMs suffering from burnout, please, 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 Google is your friend. Just Google I say Google your symptoms. Never Google your symptoms, but Google ways of coping on how to overcome DM burnout, because there are plenty and plenty of resources out there. Avoid things on social media, but Reddit, which is a chat forum, fill your boots. There are plenty of DMs all over the world that have suffered DM burnout. Me being one of them. I'll give you my Twitter, Dan, so you can put on a tag or something. Know. And if people want to reach out, if they ever want to mention about DM burnout, just hit me up, and I will try and help in any way I can. Because as someone who has constantly been suffering from DM burnout, it's hard. It's hard.
Or I'm sure if anyone's looking for a player, I'm sure.
Yeah, if anyone's looking for a player, just give me a shout. I will drop everything except a Wednesday night. Except a Wednesday night. That's Warhammer night. Yeah.
And that shan't be moved.
And that shall not be moved.
Awesome. Well, the only thing left to say then is thank you ever so much, Harry, for joining us in today's discussion.
And thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to seeing this released, as I'm going for the #1 fan spot. I do hope you know this.
There's some stiff competition.
Yeah, well, I'm going for #1.
We'll have to have some fan event, and you can all vie for my appraisal. My dream has come true.
Your dream has come true. I will get myself a Thinking Critically t-shirt. That is the prize.
Like the one I'm donning right now for those watching on the video formats. Yes. Lovely. Well, again, thanks, Harry. Thank you to everybody for listening below. As usual, references and links will be in the episode description. And please reach out to, myself or Harry for any tips or thoughts or questions you might have. Otherwise, thank you all for listening, and good night.
Good night.
Now it's time for the Patreon shout-outs. Huge thank you to all my patrons, starting with Josh, Lewanika and Glenn, the 3 fabulous hosts of Tabletop Journeys who've been on the show several times before and who I'll always invite back. So go check out Tabletop Journeys at ttjourneys.com or at ttjourneys on Twitter. We also have Joe from the Fourth Leg podcast all about giving DMs another leg to stand on. Again, previous guests of the show, and I'd thoroughly encourage you to go and check out their great content. So you can find them at the Fourth Leg on Twitter. We have a good friend of the show, Optional Rule. You can go and find him out on optionalrule.com or at Optional Rule, full of very insightful and educated comments and thoughts and threads on the really nitty-gritty of D&D. And good friend of the show and one of my table mates, Matthew Street. Go and check out his partner's hustle at virtualtimehustle.com or at mpstreet88 on Twitter.